Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida. This is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, manager at RefTelis and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking transportation design in the Bull City. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. So if you're not already a member, go ahead and become a member because that helps support this podcast. And you can also give GovLove a follow on LinkedIn. So if you're not already following us, that is the best place to make sure you never miss an episode, in addition to giving us a follow on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Now, let me introduce today's guests. So first up, we have Councilmember Nate Baker. He's an at-large council member for the City of Durham, North Carolina. He was elected to his first term in 2023. His other hat, professionally, he's a planning manager for LOI Engineers, where he manages planning and zoning projects as a consultant. He previously served as a planner in Alexandria, Virginia, and El Paso, Texas, as well as roles at a couple of other planning consulting firms. And then our second guest is Lauren Grove. She's the Vision Zero coordinator for the City of Durham, a position she's been in since 2023. And previously, she worked in planning and analyst roles for the City of Houston, Texas, and is a planning intern for the Ann Arbor Downtown Development Authority. So welcome to GovLove, both of you. I really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, so we have a tradition on the podcast to start with a lightning round to get to know our guests a little bit, allow you guys to warm up. So Lauren, I'm going to start with you for the first one. What's the first concert that you went to?
The Monkees.
The Monkees.
I had to think about this, and it was late 90s. They had a resurgence. I think they did a VH1 behind the scenes or whatever that VH1 special was back in the day. And they picked up some steam from that apparently and did a concert tour. And I went to that with some friends from middle school and our moms. And it was an experience.
That's amazing. I feel like the Monkees have an outsized place in my memory because of there was their TV show used to run reruns on TV Land or something, and I just remember the theme song. It would play in my head all the time, hey, we're the Monkees.
Exactly.
We like to monkey around.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, and Councilmember Baker, what's your first concert?
Ben Folds.
Oh, cool. Nice. Very North Carolina.
Very North Carolina, absolutely. Yeah, rocking the suburbs and all that good stuff.
Very cool. Awesome. All right, so Nate, we'll start with you for the next question. What book are you currently reading?
I am reading the autobiography of Nelson Mandela.
Oh, nice. What inspired that choice?
It's been sitting on my bookshelf for a long time, and I started reading it, and it's actually a much easier read than I was expecting, which I kind of want over the holidays. So, and I think he's just someone who I think about a lot, and I wanted to learn more about his life and his thinking. So, yeah,
very cool. Yeah, an easy read over the holidays.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I agree. Yeah. All right, Lauren, what about you? What book are you currently reading?
So I am reading 3 different books, which is I'm learning about myself. A thing that I'm constantly doing is bouncing back and forth between books. One is True Refuge by Tara Brach. It's really about sort of acceptance and self reflection and mindfulness, and really kind of gets into meditation practices and things like that. I'm reading Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, which is really about how we can feel really good about advocacy in politics, and kind of just starting on that one. And then my third one is pretty relevant for work. It's Street Fight by Jeanette Sadi-Khan, who used to be the transportation commissioner during the Bloomberg era, and is accredited for, the pedestrianization of Times Square and a lot of New York City's sort of shift towards ped and bike infrastructure. And it is very fierce because she is a fierce advocate for this work. And yeah. So a little bit of everything, I think. I'm reading.
Yeah. I love it. I also, from time to time we'll bounce between books. Been known to do that, so I can appreciate that. Awesome. All right, and then Lauren, we'll make you start with this next one too. Where do you go for inspiration?
So there's like the sort of maybe introspective place that I go. So I mentioned one of the books I'm reading is kind of in the realm of meditation and self-reflection. So I often meditate or journal as a place to go for that sort of openness and inspiration. And then there's the actual like location-based places that I go. I love taking solo trips to different cities and exploring all of the ways to get around, walking, biking, taking the bus. I always come back so refreshed from experiences like that. Just recently went to Richmond, Virginia for the first time.
Yeah.
And feeling that like inspiration that happens going to other places and seeing what it's like to get around there outside of a car.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love that. That's a great answer. All right, council member, what about you? Where do you go for inspiration?
Yeah, I agree with Lauren. Just going to other cities and seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly of everywhere else, and using those experiences to and trying to apply, kind of what you see and what you learn in the one city that we're in is in Durham. So kind of my go-to. My mother lives in San Francisco, so I go out there at least once a year, and there are certain walks that I like to do, and so I think that's one of my go-tos. But the other answer I have is just any public library, any city I go to. I love to go to the public library, and here in Durham, I love going to the public libraries that we have. And it's just it's one of those beautiful spaces where it's just everything is free. It's just free because it's something that we value as a society, and we spend our money so that you can go and get a book and you don't have to pay anything. And it's almost like in this in a society where everything is getting privatized, and we still have this last remaining space almost in any city or town where everything is free. I just think is a very special place.
Yeah, I love that. And it's cool to see like what innovations like some libraries are doing. Like there's different, I don't know, like things you can rent in some of them and rooms that they have. That's a good tip.
Totally.
All right. So I gave for our listeners, I gave a little bio for each of y'all, but I'm curious like how you guys would each describe your path to the role you're working in today. And Nate, maybe we can start with you. Like, how would you can you talk about how you ended up in this field, and then maybe specifically as a council member for the city of Durham?
Yeah, I mean, I really have to give Durham as a city the credit for that. I was born and raised in Durham. I went through Durham public schools, and just kind of spent a lot of time in my childhood kind of walking around the city, and just looking at it. And I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I loved cities and I loved visiting other cities. And I would always come back to Durham and just what I loved about Durham and what I wanted to change about Durham. And then I started studying planning. As soon as I got to college, I started studying planning, and my first job out of college was planning. I got my master's in planning. Got a Fulbright Research Fellowship in Brazil in planning, and then worked as a consultant, doing comprehensive plans and land use plans and zoning regulation updates for many different communities. And that opportunity, again, allowed me to kind of play this pollinator role, learning from one city and applying what I learned in various cities to the next city that I'd work in. And kind of seeing again, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and getting a sense of what the possibilities are, and how to practically achieve them based on the politics and based on the state enabling legislation, and kind of based on what the community desired, and trying to empower communities and the voices that are often impacted or underheard. And then meanwhile, I also joined the Durham Planning Commission and started getting more deeply involved in activism here in my hometown, and sort of had this a little bit of a period of this parallel universe where I'm kind of bouncing from city to city and learning and applying things as a professional, and then being involved in Durham and kind of seeing how things were playing out here and feeling like we could be doing things better and starting to speak out about things. And over time, I got this feeling that I needed to run for office. It felt like the right place for me to be. And so ended up doing that in 2023 and joining the city council at the end of last year.
Interesting. Was there like a tipping point or something that was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually run. Or was it one thing that maybe, I don't know, or I don't even know how you come to a decision like that, but was there something that tipped you over to being like, I definitely want to run. I'm going to do it, versus like, just, I don't know, being on the planning commission and continuing kind of that work?
I think just through conversations with people and, kind of floating the idea and seeing how people would react, or hearing from someone, hey, you should run. And then eventually you just hear it from enough people that you realize you're not crazy for thinking maybe it's the right place for you. And then deciding to actually do it. And, all of a sudden now there are people who are willing to step up and volunteer for your campaign. Local elections, you got to have volunteers, and someone stepping up and saying, hey, I'd like to manage your campaign, or I'd like to serve as your treasurer. And just the fact that there were people willing to do that, people, critical amount of people who are willing to use their own free time, for you to make yourself a political candidate. I think we reached a tipping point where it made it seem like a good route to take.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. And Lauren, I'm gonna have the same question for you in a minute, but I'm curious, Nate. So obviously, in your professional capacity, you work, I imagine, with a fair number of city councils, and so what's maybe surprised you about going from working with councils and that side of like being, I don't know, a professional, and going to becoming a council member? Like, what is that? I don't know. What's surprised you about maybe that switch or that role that, as in your paid job, you weren't you didn't think about or were maybe unaware of?
They're different in so many ways. One way that I think that they are the same is working within a bureaucracy with a lot of different stakeholders to try to achieve an outcome that advances sustainability, that advances equity, that creates a more walkable city. And the way that it's different is, when you're a consultant, all the politics that have allocated the resources to bring a consultant and to achieve an objective, that's already been done. You've already been invited into the community. They want you there. It took politics and political maneuvering to make that happen. And so now, kind of wearing the advocacy hat and the politics hat, one thing is, trying to get to a point where we have the majority, where we have the coalitions, where we have the community voices that are calling for some sort of change to occur, so that we can move and advance policy in specific realms. And in the consulting world, it's really a lot of kind of leading from behind, and being a little quieter, but trying to help people understand how to achieve better outcomes and arrive at those conclusions on their own. And obviously in politics, it's being the voice that's trying to do that and speaking out louder. So in that way, it's a bit different.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And Lauren, what about you? What was your path to the position you're in today and working for the city of Durham?
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear Councilmember Baker's path, because I know in the planning field, a lot of folks sort of just like discover it later on in their career. It's not something we're really we learn about in elementary or middle school, like we would like a doctor, an engineer or something. So I am in the camp of discovering it much later in life. I was working in Detroit. My background is in neuroscience. And I, thought the best way to help people would be to be a doctor. And so I was pursuing a pathway that sort of married my passion with mental health and sort of the sciences. And I was working in Detroit doing some clinical research on fetal brain development. And a lot of the participants who were in our research study were women who had some set of conditions that put them at risk for delivering preterm. And so we were working with these women to sort of see, are there predictors in brain development and their fetal brain development of why that is the case. It was very technical research using MRI and a lot of, really intricate ways of assessing this. But what I really took to was the more qualitative aspect of the work. Every single participant that qualified for this research were women who were mostly Black, African American. They were low income. They did not have more than a high school education. They did not have access to transportation. And I just remember after so many questionnaires that these women were filling out, seeing the same story show up, starting to ask questions of like, but wait, why? Why can't the city provide these things for these women so they can take better care of themselves, so they can get to their appointments? Why is this the case? And I just remember starting to poke at this, and being in Detroit, there's so much history and background on that very thing of literally segregating certain populations. And a lot of that is how we build our cities. And a lot of that is the policy in place. And when I started to ask these questions, people were like, you should take a class, or there's this, particular component of what you're asking that you can learn more about the history and the future of Detroit. And I took a class. It was like this special class at the time. I had moved to Detroit right when they declared bankruptcy. And it was like a month before, in 2013. And so there were just a lot of aspects of city planning that were coming up, but I didn't see it that way. I was just in this new stage of discovering sort of why certain populations have better access to care than others. And when I took this class, I got so excited.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? I liked my neuroscience classes, but I loved this class. And the professor was like, oh, this is an urban planning class. And I said, what is that? Because I had never heard of that before. And as soon as I started looking into it, I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing. So I went back and got my master's in urban and regional planning from University of Michigan. And it just like, from there, like every class I took was just reassurance, like, oh, this is how I help people. And this is how I help populations of people, is better policy, better planning, making sure people have access to the things that they need the most. And I didn't take any transportation classes in grad school, which is also very funny that I'm now, that's what I've been doing my whole planning career, which is still very new. But I think when I worked at the Ann Arbor Downtown Development Authority, they were converting a lot of their one-way streets in their downtown back to two-way. And I just got really into how street design impacts safety and access, and just creating streets as places that people enjoy, and that the simple notion of like just converting it from one to two-way can do that. I really, really saw transportation as so much more than maybe how we think about it on the day-to-day, where we might not even think about it, right? Like most people probably really don't think about the intricacies of their travel, but I saw this as a huge opportunity to really create places that are inherently safe, but also just, they are places for so many different functions. And I think that's a really, really incredible way to get involved in the planning profession.
Yeah, very cool. I love that, and the path from neuroscience to urban planning. I don't know if you're one of one, but you might be.
It
And
makes so
maybe
much sense to me, but yeah,
yeah. Maybe as a ground setting too for the rest of our conversation, can you maybe talk about a little bit about the City of Durham's Vision Zero efforts? So what goes into some of your day-to-day work and some of the, I don't know, programs or initiatives that you manage?
Yeah, sure. So a caveat, I've been here just over a year. I started in December of 2023. Mm-hmm. So I'm still very much learning the intricacies of everything that the City of Durham has done before my time as it relates to Vision Zero. So right now, the last year, we've been working on developing an action plan for the City of Durham. So mm-hmm. the city, adopted Vision Zero in 2017, but hasn't formalized a strategy for how to achieve zero traffic deaths and serious injuries. And to me, that strategy comes in the form of developing an action plan. Mm-hmm. So looking at, crash history, looking at sort of riskier corridors and the combination of equity and community feedback, and saying, okay, we are going to prioritize these roadways in these communities and chip away at this from there. So that's really the last year I've been doing a lot of outreach to other departments and learning what their role is in working within the right of way, working with community members. We have a Vision Zero coalition that is really existing of organizations that advocate for, better transportation options. We have an internal City of Durham working group to help us. All of this is really focused on helping us develop an action plan that gets us to zero. And, it won't just be this one action plan. We'll obviously develop iterations over time. But that's the focus right now, is getting City of Durham to have a strong framework for achieving zero traffic deaths and serious injuries.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, and I appreciate you guys both joining, because I wanted to get kind of, as we heard from your intros and both those answers, the kind of dueling perspectives of staff, administering kind of what we're going to talk about, and also the, politics advocacy perspective as well. So, and we'll link to an article about this, but in October, the Durham City Council voted to update the city's transportation design standards. And we'll get into that a little bit and what that'll mean. But maybe, as a maybe a way to kind of set up the conversation some, why was it necessary to change those standards? And this is to both of you, also feel free to both of you to chime in, or maybe some of the issues with the old standards. Why was there a need to kind of, take a look at the design standards and refresh them?
I'll start. So we and I think the link that you'll put on the website will talk about the resolution that we passed at council, which did two things. The first thing is it officially adopted guidelines. So it adopted the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, street and bike guidelines, as well as ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers guidelines. And that's really supposed to be directed at redevelopment projects of existing right-of-way, which, you kind of need guidelines rather than just pure dimensional standards, although there are dimensional recommendations in those guidelines. So it officially adopted those because, and I think Lauren will be able to get into this a little bit more, because we didn't have any guidelines. We didn't have any guidelines up until that point. So the second thing that the resolution does is it essentially says we need to, within a reasonable time period, because Durham is actually going through a rewrite of the Unified Development Ordinance, the first rewrite in a couple decades, that within that time frame, which is supposed to be at the end of 2025, could potentially bleed into 2026, we also need to update our street design standards. That is the very that is the requirements for dimensional standards, the width between curbs, where the location of street trees, the width of sidewalks, the width of lanes, all of those different pieces. Because as we know with transportation, I mean, transportation is land use. It is 1/3 of our cities is the public right of way. It is the place that we experience our cities. When we go to and visit these cities, that is the place where we experience them. We fetishize the comfort of drivers and leather seats and heating, but oftentimes we don't think about the comfort of someone just walking down the street, the most natural form of transportation possible, which is just using your legs. And so we need to translate that into dimensions within new right of way, and as well as existing right of way. And one reason why the standards themselves are going to be, once they are updated, which we will need to hire a consultant to do that. One reason that is so important is because Durham is growing on its edges, annexing land at the request of large landowners on the city's periphery so rapidly. The city's grown by about 10% in land area over the past 5 to 6 years. And we are doing so in perhaps the most unsustainable way possible, which is American style suburban planning with single family and single use, separated by large distances, and homes facing away from arterials, curvilinear streets, intersections that are completely dangerous. If anyone were even to try to walk, probably no one would even want to walk because there's nothing to walk to. And so we need to get that part right. And it needs to be in connection to the new Unified Development Ordinance. And all these pieces need to come together, because when we look at our built environment in the United States of America, Durham included, and especially, we see an urban environment, an urban built pattern that is completely broken, completely unsustainable, is not serving the public good, is not creating places that people can walk, is not creating places where people can realistically ride transit, are not creating places that are green and sustainable, and where we have public dedication of public goods, and shared uses of those. So those are the two things that the resolution itself does: is the guidelines, immediately adopting those guidelines, and calling for an update and an overhaul to our standards.
Got it.
Yeah, and I'll add in on sort of just a little bit that I find interesting being at the City of Durham and having worked in another city, as it relates to design standards specifically. So the term, or thinking about our current standards, it's a little fuzzy from my perspective, because you have some street design standards in the Unified Development Ordinance that Councilmember Baker just mentioned, which is our, land use code. You have some. It's not comprehensive, though. I will say we don't have street types in our land use code. Like if you are building residential development, the streets should, look like this and accommodate people walking or biking or this certain speed, right? Some of that is in there, not holistically. And then you have within our Public Works Department a reference guide for development, which is somewhere between 400 and 600 pages. And they use that as well. That has a set of standards, but again, maybe not comprehensive, maybe doesn't have all the accommodations for all road users. So yeah, we definitely need to think about how we create a set of standards that are comprehensive for citywide, street functionality and street types, that do accommodate all of the ways that we want to move around, that maybe if we don't have a choice, we are forced to move outside of a car. And so we're kind of trying to, I think, from my perspective, use the NACTO guidance as the push to create a set of design standards that would encompass where we're trying to go. And we'd still have the UDO, we'd still have the Unified Development Ordinance. And this set of design standards for our streets would serve as an adjunct to that, right? Because I think it's important, just like Councilmember Baker said, like land use and transportation are not like separate by any means. And so we really need to be careful about, creating a separate standalone document of standards. But there are other cities in North Carolina that have done this, Charlotte and Raleigh. Raleigh most recently updated theirs to create a pretty strong set of street types and functions that include ways of all road users need to get around, and include stormwater management and all of the functions of a street, right? Like our streets do so many different things, and we've built them specifically for one thing for way too long. Yeah. So this is a really good opportunity for us to make that step towards something that really represents our environment and our, sustainability goals, our economic development goals. We know streets can do a lot to boost business and retail. They are part of our ecosystem. So I think moving towards something like that really, this is our concrete set of street design standards and makes it very clear of what we need to be doing with our right of way.
Yeah. So I'm curious, as like a resident, navigating Durham, like wow, knowing and recognize that you guys, there's still work left to do. There's an update to the UDO. There's a change to the standards that needs to be more formally adopted. But taking the guidelines and saying, like, under these guidelines versus the old practice, but maybe how would a resident or a visitor to Durham, how would they experience the street differently versus, an intersection or a street design under the old guidelines versus one under the new guidelines?
I'll jump in and say, since the resolution was adopted, we in the Transportation Department have been coordinating with folks in Public Works on looking at the NACTO design guidance in really great detail and looking at our Unified Development Ordinance in great detail to see what is in there right now that actually aligns with NACTO, what's missing, what can we get in this current rewrite. Huge opportunity with the current rewrite to integrate NACTO into that. But the timeline is very tight. And so what are those components that we can integrate right now? So I think it's maybe too soon to say what this specific resolution will do to our street design standards, because I like to think of NACTO design guidance as like a menu at a restaurant. You can pick something out and maybe you don't have all of the ingredients or know the exact measurements, but you know what's there. You have a menu of options. And then the literal actual design standards themselves are the recipes with every single ingredient and measurement. And so we need to take those NACTO principles and move towards that more detailed look. And we're just sort of getting started. So we have some recommendations for one example I'll give that could be really transformative is moving towards a multimodal impact analysis. So right now we have the traditional transportation impact analysis that really focuses on the vehicle, right? Like how many lanes do we need for the projected traffic in 40 years? And let's maybe step back and use an analysis that looks at all road users, and we build according to that. And that's very much in line with NACTO. That's something we could, in theory, integrate into the UDO. But again, the impacts of that are more long-term, right? We'll see it as development starts to come in.
I'll add to that, and maybe a little bit different way. I think Lauren gave the right answer and gave the detailed answer of how all this stuff is going to get done from a technical standpoint. I think that, and it won't happen immediately. Obviously, there's so much work to be done, and we're sort of steering a ship. But the way ideally someone will change their experience from these technical changes and these political changes is, and I always say that everyone's a planner, because if you put someone on the side of the road somewhere, you can ask someone, are you comfortable with where you're standing?
Yeah.
And if you put someone out on the side of 15501 in between Durham and Chapel Hill, and they're waiting for the bus in the rain and the mud, and cars are going by at 45 miles per hour, and you look down the road and you can't see where the next intersection is, and you don't see any building frontages that where there's permeability and translucent frontages where people can see in and out, move in and out, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to be happy, and you're not going to feel good. But there are certain parts of our city and certain parts of other cities, of course, where you're on the sidewalk. If it's a sunny day, you have shaded trees above you. You have building awnings. You have a nice wide sidewalk to walk on. Maybe you're walking with friends. You can see where the next intersection is. Maybe the utility lines are buried, and so the shaded trees are allowed to grow as much as they need to. Where when you're walking down the street, there's something interesting to look at. You're either looking ahead at a terminating vista, or you're looking to your side, and there are doors and windows on buildings, in and out of apartments, in and out of shops. And in some sense, you just feel comfortable. You're shaded in the summertime, and you're covered, if there's rain, and there are places to go in and out if it's cold out. And that is not how we have been building new things for a very long time. In fact, I think we have collectively as a society forgotten how to do that and need to relearn that. Our planners forgot it. Our architects forgot it. Our engineers forgot it. Our politicians forgot it. Our financiers forgot it. Everyone who collectively constructs cities forgot how to build a walkable city in most of our country, and certainly our mid-sized cities like Durham and other places. And so this work that we're doing, this work that Lauren's doing in transportation, public works, and other folks in this giant apparatus are the city bureaucracy. I mean, it takes learning new things and introducing new things to move the ship in an entirely new direction and completely change course. I mean, we've been doing the wrong thing for so long. It's so hard to break from that. It takes so many things to change. And we got to be careful about that change too, because we need to be careful about the unintended consequences of, what if we make a tweak to this or that, and then all of a sudden we have put gentrification displacement into hyperdrive. So we need to be careful. We need to empower voices that we often haven't heard, and at the same time, we know that it's just the way we've been building is broken, and there is a good way, a best practice way of building our streets, and there are ways that we've been doing it for too long.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's really well said. And part of why I wanted to talk to y'all about this is, I had a conversation with Connor Semler back in the end of 2023, who was part of some of the rewrite of the NACTO guidance. And so I was curious about this transition, this exact one that you touched on, council member, of going from this kind of high level, theoretical, and Lauren, you talked about this too, like the theoretical to the practical of like, what does this mean? And you can feel some of the like, friction, maybe it might be the right word, of like, we want to go here, but Lauren, you mentioned like, for most of our developments, we expect a vehicle count, an estimated traffic study to go with our go with to understand the impact of this new development. And so, what does it mean under these new guidance if we don't just care about vehicles. We want to do something else. And so how does that change our process and some of our practices? And so it's interesting to hear this kind of, as you guys wrestle with this, like what that means for the city. So
yeah, I feel like in my review of some of the existing practices, I'm just like, well, we're going to continue to get the auto-centric culture because of the current standards that we have. And we kind of need to shake that, be a little bit more open to experimentation and innovation to move past those ways. And it can be scary. Mm-hmm. I think that's what I really appreciate about the NACTO guidance and principles is they build that into a lot of the nature of their work. They are not saying this is a war on cars, that, we want to do away with it completely. There's so many different needs for so many different people, and we just have not had the best set of practices to meet those needs. And it's possible. Mm-hmm. We've seen it in other cities. We've seen it in cities that have achieved zero. Alexandria, Virginia, one of them, just 2023, 0 traffic deaths. Hoboken, New Jersey, for 7 years in a row have had 0 traffic deaths because they've really focused on a set of practices that are proven to improve safety. And really their value system is like, we prefer to save lives than continue to prioritize something we know has led to more dangerous roadways and traffic deaths in our city. And so I think that's where the leadership piece is really important too. And I'm so grateful to come into the city of Durham and have such strong elected officials who care about this work, such a strong community that cares about this work and cares about, we need to do this equitably. So I think that's a really big piece of this too, is making sure that we're really using NACTO as the inspiration and using our community voices to put all of that into context. Yeah. Like, okay, what does this look like for Durham? How's Durham gonna set itself apart and achieve 0 in the way that feels authentic to us?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Well, and Councilmember, to your point too, you also don't want the implementation to have unintended side effects of, especially in a place that's growing quickly like Durham, of pricing people out and of gentrification displacement. So being thoughtful and comparing it with the UDO update, like you guys have talked about, will hopefully help with that. So Councilmember, I'm curious. So obviously, and you can tell from your answers today that you're pretty passionate about this. At the same time, transportation design standards, pretty technical, pretty in the weeds. I'm curious how you got, the political buy-in and, worked with stakeholders to get these resolutions. Because, in the article that we'll link to, like your reference as a champion of this effort. And so can you talk maybe about that political process and that advocacy process of being like, hey, how do you make these like technical transportation designy things matter to people, and how do you get kind of the buy-in from stakeholders and your fellow council members around something like this?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not a very smart guy. I like to get things done by bringing the right people together who are smart and who can figure things out. And it's amazing what you can get done by just bringing a bunch of smart people with different points of view into the same room. And so I won in November. I started in December. I convened a group of transportation folks, a bunch of different stakeholders within city, as well as a few advocates, community advocates, into the same room in January. And Lauren was there. And we had a 1-hour conversation where we talked through a few of these issues. And pretty much at the end of the meeting, a couple different ideas emerged. And so I floated them back. And I think Lauren maybe even originated the idea of, one thing you could do. And this is actually something that we had done when I was a city planner in El Paso, Texas, in 2012, you could pass a resolution adopting NACTO guidelines. It's sort of a easy, low-hanging fruit first step. Now, low-hanging fruit and easy aren't always easy immediately, and you need to, again, sort of have that buy-in from others, win hearts and minds, kind of get the scaries out. And I even spoke,
it's easy compared to the other options, right? Not
absolutely, yeah. Everything it takes to reach a vision zero, right? I mean that's a massive goal. And but there are certain steps along the way, and I mean, and this is one of them, and this is low hanging fruit, right? And so so through that, I mean, that emerged as a critical piece, as well as the need to kind of update the standards that are tied to the Unified Development Ordinance. And so that's where it began, and we continued the conversation, a series of conversations behind the scenes, and then eventually, I think it was maybe in September, I brought it forth after some conversations with my colleagues on council, and we discussed it a few times during work sessions. And there were many questions that were had by my colleagues. Why isn't this been brought forward before? And finally kind of got to a point of comfort. There was outside advocacy from community members, so we had that community buy-in. Bike Durham, a really, really important multimodal advocate in Durham, voiced their strong support for it, which I think helped garner additional political support on council. And ultimately, I think that the cards sort of started to fall such that we were able to win a unanimous vote on council.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and having that outside but also inside approach, I guess that's a good way to get all the buy-in you need.
Absolutely.
And Lauren, you mentioned this a little bit as you guys are starting to think through some of the UDO update, but I know as being a former City of Durham employee, that navigating internal politics and bringing all the right people to the table to make big changes can be difficult in any organization. And then I know in Durham, transportation is separate from public works, which is separate from stormwater, or stormwater is part of public works, but is separate from some other departments that might have a role in this, and utilities that has a role in kind of streets. So I'm just curious, like, as you guys have started to work through what implementing this resolution will be, how you've kind of worked with some of the other departments, or what that has been like as you kind of navigate this.
Yeah, I definitely want to give credit to folks in public works who, collaboratively came to the table and said, all right, how do we do this? What does this really look like? And so we have identified some of the current practices in our land use code, and then that other reference guide that I mentioned that maybe get us to embody some of those NACTO principles. But a lot of things that we would need to add in. And so we're kind of, I think, Public Works being a really key implementer of things in our right of way. We're starting there. And we have, some recommendations that we've passed along to the consultant that's currently managing the rewrite for the Unified Development Ordinance. I think that's kind of hopefully in the new year, going to open a door to have more conversations with more of the other departments to talk about, what's the implication of some of these changes? What are the trade-offs, right? We're always going to be talking about maintenance. We're always going to be talking about, as climate continues to change, how we manage water and how our streets are a big part of that. We're always going to be talking about the effects of, air pollution and pollution from from automobiles, and how we can mitigate that within the right of way with street trees and other air purification practices. And all of that can be included in a set of standards for our right of way. So we kind of are working towards identifying, I guess, continuing the theme of low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit right now is ensuring we can get in some really key changes to the UDO now.
Yeah.
And that's going to be tough because there's a lot of pieces to coordinate. I think the timeline is the end of 2025, which maybe feels like a long time, but to bring everybody in and to identify these changes and get them in there and find that balance of like, this is a really big change. Maybe we set that aside for the street design manual that we want to create. So I think that's what we're trying to like, let's focus in on the things that are going to be fairly easy to get in the current UDO. And it's not like this is our only chance, but you know, let's use that now, but then have sort of the bones for what we want our street design manual to look like. So the time frame is sort of short term UDO, how can we impact that? And right now we actually have in the draft Vision Zero action plan an action to create a street design manual that would really kind of capture all of the things that we might not want to put in the UDO. The UDO is also like, I don't know, 600 pages.
Yeah.
So, you know, without putting so much detail into that, the street design manual could serve it as that sort of detailed look. So we've got this short-term opportunity and then the long-term street design manual that I'm really excited about. I worked on the last 2 years at the City of Houston updating their infrastructure and design manual and really focused on the ped bike transit section and integrating NACTO into that and creating it in the context of the City of Houston. And, you know, really walked away with a lot of amazing progressive set of standards that applied not only when development happened, but if there was a retrofit, if you were going to be tearing up a water main to put in a new one. Every one of those is an opportunity to do a safer street reconfiguration. Yeah. And so the manual was applicable for all of those scenarios. And I'd love to see the City of Durham have something very similar and really get us to have infrastructure citywide that feels that way rather than, well, you go to some neighborhoods and there are sidewalks and there are safe crossings. And then you go to different neighborhoods and it's open ditch and there's no street lighting and, you know, no actual bus landing pad for the bus stop. So this is what we want to create is a set of standards that apply citywide, not dependent on your neighborhood wealth or advocacy necessarily.
Yeah. Or history or whatever. Yeah.
No. Or history. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I imagine part of why you want to do a manual like that is that you can update it as it implements or as the city changes. While, you know, like you mentioned, y'all mentioned at the beginning, updating the UDO is a much bigger effort. It doesn't happen maybe as frequently as updating a manual could.
Right. That's right. Yeah, we know those standards change. I mean, the last 10 years, how much like have, let's say, bikeway facilities changed significantly. We have changed those standards to make them much safer and better and applicable for, you know, different types of streets and using different types of physical separation and different intersection treatments. That has morphed so fast. So yeah, you need to create a manual or a process to update that, you know, matches the ever-changing nature of roadway design.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I'm loving this conversation. So I'm curious though. So obviously there's lots of work to do around the UDO update and more in the, you know, street design manual that y'all want to create. But for this resolution, are there projects that are going to be impacted now? Like, are you going to see, or you know, residents of Durham or staff going to see changes to, you know, how a new development, you know, gets it put in, or public works projects or redesigns, or I don't know, street repavings? Are there going to be changes kind of in the short term, or will most of the like actual on the ground changes happen after the UDO and manual get created?
I would say, so I'll recognize that we have, at least in the time that I've been here in the last year, I haven't seen any projects get on the ground yet that haven't incorporated like some element of the NACTO principles. I'll call on some of the street resurfacing projects that have happened in my time here. So Main Street is one of those key corridors that is owned by the state, but they have a resurfacing program. So, depending on a set of conditions, streets are getting resurfaced every so often. And when you resurface, you are going to put pavement markings down. Well, let's use this opportunity to rethink how we can make that particular roadway safer. And so that's Main Street is just one of them where it's a very wide roadway, but it was really 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction, but it had this like massive striped out center area that wasn't really functional. It was just honestly wasted space. And so rethinking what that looks like, to actually add in a buffered bike lane. And I would say that's in line with NACTO. So like those principles are being integrated when opportunities come up actively. And I think that will continue as we continue to resurface roadways and there's any other retrofit opportunities that come up. There's the general sense of like, a push towards designs that align with those NACTO guidelines.
Yeah. As opportunities arise, you guys are taking advantage of it. That makes a lot
Right.
of sense. Well, I'm curious that brought up a question that I wanted to ask is obviously Durham is not alone in this problem where some of the major streets are owned by the state and, those streets, I'm thinking in particular of Roxborough and downtown, like those are, designed in in a very auto-friendly way and are quite difficult to traverse on a bike or foot. So I'm curious from both of your perspectives, like what will it be like to address those streets? And then, I don't know, Nate, how you build in from stakeholders about with the state around that. But how are you guys thinking about kind of some of those state roads that can have a big impact on both Vision Zero and some of these improving, alternative forms of transportation, but, aren't directly in the city's control?
Yeah, I think what I'll say is it at least what we want to do is make sure that we are doing things the right way where we can. And I don't think that we've even been doing that. I think that it's important that we have tools available to us as well as people like Lauren and others in the city who want to push back. And I think that's a place where we need to start from is just the desire to push back against NCDOT practices, which we know, there's God and then there's DOT, that their practices of just moving vehicles, as swiftly and as quickly as possible. This is the problem in just about every state, right? We want to push back against that, and we need to be equipped with the tools and the desire to push back against that. And we can't afford to learn about a NCDOT restriping project or repaving project or reconstruction project or construction project and then catch ourselves on our heels to try and at the last minute improve the design of the project. We need to be ready on our toes and with the right tools and design best practices to equip ourselves to be able to push for something better. I think that's sort of square one. And then I think Lauren will probably be able to give you a little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, that's perfect, Councilmember, that you mentioned that, because the piece about like maybe we're trying to squeeze things in right now.
Yeah.
And my personal opinion is, well, we don't have anything to show up to go to bat for. And I think that's why I'm kind of stuck on like, if we had a set of street design standards that said, this is what we value, this is what we are going to say, you have to meet this amount of sidewalk width with this amount of buffer to allow for street trees, and have a bikeway facility that's off street with safe crossings every 500 feet. Having like the gold standard literally be our adopted ordinance standard requirement that we're asking for would allow us to have those conversations with a DOT or another, entity that owns right of way to say like, hey, this is what we're building on our city streets. This is our highest standard. And so, this is what we'd like to see in this context, because a lot of those roadways are in the context of urban areas and development and residential, and you have a lot of different activity and you have people that are out walking and wanting to get to these places. Let's try to build for that and use some of our standards that we have set to get there. But right now, we don't really have that to point to. We're sort of like, bringing these ideas forward and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
And I have to believe that if we, had a stronger set of holistic, comprehensive principles and standards for our roadways, that those conversations might be a little easier. I'm not saying it's going to change the game at all. We're still going to have to fight. We're still going to have to come to the table. But I think I will say DOT has also shown like they're willing to make these changes on some of these projects. We just have to have that strong ask, I think. And that's where I'm like, well, I think our strong ask is like saying, hey, here's the standard for this type of roadway. And then you can kind of like work down from there rather than maybe starting not from the top, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And then it's not piecemeal also. You have like a standard
exactly
for every project rather than coming hat in hand every time they do a repaving.
Right.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. And obviously, you guys have mentioned that there's a lot of work. So maybe after the UDO is passed and you guys are basking in the glory of a new standard and a traffic and a street manual, you can come back and talk about all that went into that. But I'm curious, what else besides, that giant project, what else are you guys working on? What's next that, our listeners ought to look out for in the coming months?
I'll say it really quickly because it's hopefully literally within the next month. Our Vision Zero action plan, and first ever for the city of Durham, that will hopefully really help us prioritize our resources and focus on the areas of most need and improve street safety for everybody.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll mention, we've talked about the Unified Development Ordinance, but obviously, I mean, that is such a critical piece to all of this, because it's not just about the right of way is absolutely critical. We got to get the design right, but we need to get everything else right too. Density, diversity, design. We need to build on private land in ways and use this DNA that we have, the UDO being our DNA, to build a city that is mixed use, that is walkable, that is designed well, and that uses what leverage we have through zoning to be able to add equity and affordable, at least workforce housing and invest in affordable housing, such that we're a more inclusive city where whether you're a teacher or a custodian at school or in the professional managerial class, where you can afford to live and live in a diverse community, and where you can walk to public parks and walk to retail and take the bus to your job. We need to get that right. There needs to be a cutoff where we look into the past. There's a date where we look into the past and say, this way that we did things is no longer. We will not do the things that way anymore. And we look to the future and say, we are doing something completely different from the way that we've done things for decades. And the past is completely detached from us. We need to get to that point, and completely and dramatically change the way that we do things. And I think that can be done in a more inclusive way. I don't think that's shoving a concept down people's throats. In fact, I think people have been demanding this for a very long time. So the UDO rewrite, and the other thing I'll say is Durham has restarted doing small area planning, which it did not do for a very long time. And it started with the Walltown, which is a neighborhood.
Yeah, neighborhood.
A neighborhood in Durham that abuts the Northgate Mall site, which is a huge potential redevelopment project with enormous opportunity. Could be a second downtown of Durham. And so making sure to get that right, conduct a small area plan process in a really good way, and hopefully use that as a model to expand into more broadly into other parts of our city.
Awesome. Very cool. Awesome. Well, that's as good of a place as any to kind of end our conversation. But I have the hardest question always. So, and since it's a group interview, that each of you guys can have an answer, or you guys can come to a consensus. But if you could be the GovLove DJ and pick the exit music for this episode, what song would you guys pick?
So I've been feeling a little rebellious lately, so I'm gonna pick The Guillotine by The Coop.
I don't even know how to come back at that. I don't know that song. I will throw out there a little backstory. My dad recently gifted me his record player from the 70s that he bought brand new. And I've been really into vinyl, and he passed along some of his records. And one of those is The Doors. And not this particular record, but it's gotten me on a Doors kick. And one of their songs is called Love Street. And it's a love letter essentially to Jim Morrison's partner at the time. But if you listen to the lyrics, it's about streets as places. He talks about like she lingers on the street. Streets are where the creatures meet. And I just like, that's what I want our streets to be. Just like where people meet and linger, and like that sort of vision to me is just kind of what fuels me to show up every day. Is like, yeah, safety is the baseline, but streets is like where I linger and where people meet. That's what I can get behind. So that's my plug for that song.
I love that. Awesome. Well, we have a rebellious song. We have a
sentimental,
but also a meaningful song. We'll let our producer, Pete and Mike, make the final choice. So appreciate that. That ends our episode for today. Lauren, Councilmember Baker, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ben. This has been fun.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Really appreciate it.
And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders, and the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGO member. You can also reach us online at elgo.org/GovLove, or you can find us on LinkedIn, and you can also give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. If you're not already subscribed, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. And with that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
I see you live on Love Street. There's the store where the creatures meet. I wonder what they do in there. Summer, Sunday, and a year. I guess I like it fine so far.